Welcome back, world. On my first time, I had to write notes to keep myself from rambling on. This is a subject I can go on for days about. My hypothesis of the ones, and I felt like God helped me out with that, with the knowledge, the experience, and the life that I lived and got a chance to see with my own eyes. This isn't for me to speak bad on anyone. The damage has already been done. All right, I'm just stating my hypothesis, and all I can do is sprinkle in a few facts that has been heavily miscued, or as people like to say, debunked. I don't even like saying that because debunk basically became a thing to basically throw off the truth or make people doubt what was truthful. But get a little airflow with the cigarette. So, if anyone, if anyone has ever heard of the story of Yakub, the one they called the Big Head Professor, the ones probably know as Lucifer or whatever of such sorts, plenty of names, all kinds of things. The story of Yakub kind of helped me piece it a little bit better, even though the story of Yakub and a few more other stories of like the Lemurians and stuff like that kind of help piece it all together because it still tells history, even though it has a different name. So let's say the ones. Let's start off by saying that at the beginning of time, everyone living on the planet at that moment were kind of like the ones. You know what I'm saying? Until the separation happened. The separation of one group who heard the voice of God versus a group that didn't hear the voice of God. The group that heard the voice of God told the other group, like, hey, you know, God told us to go to the jungle, become stronger. And the other group looked at them and was like, I'm paraphrasing. They were like, that's kind of crazy. Why would you leave all this big city that we have, this lifestyle that we have, gold paved roads, everything covered in gold, honestly. The houses, the roads, the toilets, everything was in was made of gold. And that's not, and I don't really put that much. I don't really care about gold like that, So just let that be a thing, if anything, I prefer silver over gold. But everything paved in gold. These people live in the richest of riches. You know, they had access to all the resources and the ability to manipulate those resources, in which some people would call that manipulation of those resources alchemy. Nothing more than just transferring matter from one to the next. That's no different than taking concrete and taking cement and turning it and making it into concrete. I know it sounds weird, but one is a wet and other one's dry. So the ones, they went off into the jungle, and their features changed. They came back darker skin, wider nostrils, curly hair. These were features to keep them from getting sick easily and to allow their bodies to withstand the harsh changes of the world. Because let's not forget that the planet is a living entity, just to say. But I'm starting to ramble. So you had the group that heard God, and you had the group that didn't. The group that didn't hear God, as I said, I'm not putting down anybody, but let's just call him for a historical nameplate sense. Just call them the Moors. The Moors didn't hear the voice of God, and whenever now, you know, they were all a little bit lighter skin tone, until like I said, the ones went to the jungle, became a lot more darker, you know, hair follicles, flat, water can just easily run off. Nostrils becoming wider to be able to inhale and filter and intake information through the nostrils and let it play in the brain, your computer, and break everything down. Um, so when the ones came back, and let's just say, like, I don't know, generations have been skewed. People kind of put 10 years as a generation. But let's say back in the day, a generation would have been like 20 years, 15 to 20 years to, become a new generation. 15 to 20 to 30 years. And when the ones came back, the other natives that didn't leave, heavily made fun of the ones when they came back. Uh, at first they were terrified of them. How they described them. They described the ones as demons. You come in, you all right. Let's put it in perspective. You got a group of people that's living in a city, that stayed in the city for about, let's say, 60 to maybe 150, maybe more years, and grew lazy in that city. And then you have the ones coming back, darker, muscular, the other features, wider nostrils, flat hair, changing of the hair and everything. They considered them to be demon-like, in appearance, as they described, or basically they were demonized for their appearance. And to say, like, they were made fun of, oh man, you got these wide nostrils, you got this and that, you look like this and you look like that, you don't look like me. I'm the original. I look better. So it had to be the elders of that city to confirm to the younger generation, hey, these are our people. These are the ones that I was telling you stories about that left into the jungle. And even though we sent parties to go look for them, we couldn't find them. And other parties that didn't survive out there, who didn't make it, these are them, the ones we've been telling stories to y'all about. So the elders confirmed, yes, these are the ones we spoke about. These are your family. These are your family members. It took them a while to accept that. And then, they slowly came about when it came to speaking with the elders. It always, it was always pivotal for the elders to explain what was happening, to bridge that gap of time. Um, so, still they came, they were disliked, and the nations kind of warred with each other because with the ones coming back, they're like, okay, I'm coming back, and I'm gonna go ahead and get my parents' grandparents' house, and it's like, well, my child, you know, family is staying here now. So what are we gonna do about them staying here and you want to come back and staying here? So easily, first war of resources, as to say, or to put in a very simplistic form. A lot more than just war resources. It was greed, a lot of greed involved in that. But so they came back. They were unwelcome. Um, so they did stay there for a while, and they kind of like built up their own. They didn't kick the rest of the new family members out of their parents' house or anything. They was like, well, we've been living in the jungle. We know how to sustain ourselves and make our own. We can do that here as well. And they did that. And the jealousy and everything came about because how to put it, the grass was greener. And so I don't want to try not to ramble about that because it's very pivotal, to understand the first war of greed, the first war. It was the first war for most of a lot of things. But the initial first war was basically the argument, from the very beginning, the ones who said we heard the voice of God versus the one who said we didn't hear the voice of God. That was the first war. And that was a war of ego. And so the ones were, eventually kicked out from their homeland. And they didn't really, I don't want to say they didn't care, but they were confident that they could survive anywhere. So they went ahead and left. They left, let's say like two more generations later. The gold plated land went to crap. Crops died and everything, and they wanted to blame the ones. Oh, they put a curse on us and stuff like that, and they did this and did that, and stealing our women and stuff. And the whole thing was they wasn't stealing anything. It just you have few people who were like, okay, they really seem to know something that we don't know. Let's learn from them. And they, some of them left and went to go learn from them. The ones aren't the ones that are the group from Yakud. This is still, the ones. But the ones happen to invite a few bad apples to go along with them. That's always been the case when it came to the ones. They always let the bad apples come with them. Um, so let's say the Moors. The Moors went, chased them down. Some died on the way, and some found them. Some converted. From the ones that found them, some converted over to them, and some converted just to attack them from within. The ones who converted to attack them from within, now this would be the more specific group of the Moors, because they wanted more than what was offered. It's kind of tough to take from people who have nothing, but build something out of nothing. And whenever you want to take something from them, of course you're going to be disappointed. People don't like to rob poor people because that aside, that's neither here or there. Rambling again. The Moors. So the Moors that completely, split off, after going against the ones, they became lost back and forth. And what I mean by lost is, kind of like spiritually lost, but not navigationally lost. It was just, you know, people started to think for themselves versus others who stayed with what they knew. And there was a breakdown within a group of the Moors. Um, they had their own separation. Like I said, you had those that converted with the ones, and those that converted just to attack them from within. The ones that successfully converted versus the one that converted to attack them from within, they warred against each other and they split off. That would make the Muslims and the Jews. And within those groups, they kind of started hooking up with their family members. So, genetically speaking, the Moors that hooked up with their mothers and fathers, well, yeah, with their parents, they basically made Dravidians, Middle East, Egyptian, people like that. Well, the other set of Moors that hooked up with like their sisters or brothers, they made albinos, Middle East, Scottish lineage, early British, Britain. And the other breakoff was the Moorish women who hated the Moorish men altogether. I guess those would be the ones we would mythologically call um, Amazonians. And those Amazonians that slaughtered the men around them still had sexual tendencies and sexual needs that they wanted to quell, their lust. They hooked up with animals, uh, what we would mythologically call pans and stuff like that of that nature. Uh, Half human, half animal hybrids. Might seem like it couldn't happen, and in most cases it wouldn't. but that's where it came down to how to put it, like witch doctors and early, you know, people, apothecarians and stuff like that. People that experimented with human lives and medicine and stuff like that of that nature. They made a way for the animal seed to not be destroyed within the black woman's body. And that's how you successfully came out with pans. Or you say, like, you know, latter day Euro Asians, Poland, German Asians. The ones, uh, because let's say like this, the ones were hunted down at a great, at a, in a huge mass. Um, for most of those, they became eunuchs. People that had, for the men, their members were chopped off. For the women, their uh, chest was chopped off. To grow malnourished children. Ethiopians. Um, and before the Ethiopians thing came, they the Moors that converted into the one's way of life took their teachings, stole the children, and then reconverted those children over to them, into their Hebrew ways. Um, the elders of the Moors would basically consider them low Hebrews, or like more than original Hebrews, because even though they were converted, they still had proper lineage versus the Moors who just had the teachings. They were still tied into the lineage, but their families didn't go into the jungle and everything of that nature and stuff like that as the original ones did. So the Low Hebrews were successfully converted, and then their children became Hebrews. Around this time, more fighting was happening. So now you had your Hebrews, you had your Jews, and you had your Muslims. And to put in the context, the Moors and the ones were once part of one lineage. So the second lineage that came was the albinos. All right. That's why everything in America, while there's a lot of fight about black and white, it was basically kind of like that. You had the black and white, but you had the other group of black people who needed the numbers, so they interlaced with the albinos to kind of take over. A first collusion of a takeover. They started mixing the Hebrews, the Moors, and the albinos. This is what makes the Latin nation. Now, I know everything seems like kind of like how would you know this? You ain't got no degrees or anything, but that's the perfection of it. If you study something and you study it outside of a classroom, you have freedom to study at maximum capacity of whatever you want to study. It's not like, oh, teachers like we're gonna read chapter 3 and then she only reads a few paragraphs and then it's like, all right, we're moving on, even though you still want to read the rest of the chapter. Only gonna read a few paragraphs and move on to chapter 4. When you study on your own, you can expand. You can When you study on your own, you can study one sentence for at least a year. You can expand upon that. You can expand upon that knowledge for as long as you feel like. So, all the races and everything, or genotypes, you know, coming together, breaking down, coming together, breaking down, coming together, breaking down. Let's let's get to this part. With all that studying and studying the genealogy or the eugenics of it, studying different religions, studying my own life and myself as well, came to the realization that God is beyond real. Beyond real. Beyond real. This is what terrifies the majority of people, because through manipulation of word of mouth, gathering up groups and numbers, people can scare people into a belief or make a belief seem so popular that you'll be scared of missing out on what they have to offer. And an old saying, like, I realized myself, the greatest weapon ever used against black men are the black women. Because as much as black women say men don't want them no more, it's quite the opposite. Black men love their black women. So much so that we let the women destroy us in hope that the women would eventually see the error of the ways and realize that not only are they our greatest weapon against us, they are also the greatest shield for their enemies. And I don't like saying enemies like that because it's still their creations as well. Their enemy is their creation. Us as men, we have been an enemy of ourselves to a point because of impatience or not trusting ourselves. And that that pulled us away from God even further. I'm not encouraging anyone to hurt anyone or destroy anyone or anything. But for the place where I stay at, the United States, it's imperative, very important, extremely important to read. And I know this is not something people want to hear, but I'm being dead serious. You gotta read because this world and everything that we're living by is going by different definitions. If you were to look into a simple dictionary like the Webster's Dictionary, there can be one word, but that one word may have two to may have like 2 to 5 different definitions attached to it. I guess to put in the simplistic terms, these would be slang recognized, same as um, Latin, the language of the dead. Uh, Not quite so dead, but it is, like I said, definitions. I'm not gonna get into that. That's a whole different ballpark right there. Definitions and studying the definitions and what's considered to be alive and what's considered to be dead and what's the meaning of it and corporations and persons and souls and everything attached to it. It's a it's the fact that you had a group of black people that hated other black people so much that they were willing to destroy themselves. Well, I don't want to say they were willing to destroy themselves, but they ended up destroying themselves in a sense. And it didn't have to be physical. For some, it was mental. For most, it was spiritual. For the ones, punishment had to come of depth of egos, depth of finances. And I don't like saying death like that. It's just, but if you go from having a job to being fired and or being homeless, you had a major loss to a point of almost absolute zero. And for others, it got even worse to where it went below zero, going into debt. I don't like judging people, but while I was overseas, I I, I stayed in Helmand's Providence, Afghanistan, for about 7 months, a little over 7 months. And I have to say, when I first landed there, place looked beautiful. Smelled horrible, but looked beautiful. To see all that sand and people living more naturally. As soon as my feet touched down on that ground, It was like an electrical charge, like a phone hooking up to a charger, like a phone hooking directly up to a car battery. The nostalgia left real quick though, because um, we had got news another group got attacked as we were coming in. So that feeling left pretty fast, and plus somebody stole some items, from my backpack. I was really mad about that too. um, as I stayed out there, I was always on post. First, I went further down south into where a lot of the issues were happening, fixing a lot of things, and coming back up to my position where the headquarters was at for us. And when I came back up to the headquarters, I'm on post, and we had a certain time to be on post. I had switched from post 5 to post 1, and even while I was on post 5, it would be like I would say about probably between 4 and 6 o'clock. I'm hearing a donkey just he hauling for at least 30 minutes. It was annoying. If anybody ever grew up and heard donkeys, that that can get annoying, but you can still tune it out after a while. But after I went to post 1, I'm closer to this donkey. So now it's getting a little harder to tune it out because it's louder. And I, I'm like, where is this noise coming from? I'm like, this is so annoying. I gotta see why is this donkey just going off like this? And to my surprise, there was a man in relation with his donkey, and it kind of started making sense because the interpreter was telling me that the women were strictly for reproduction only, and everything else was kind of fair play for them out there. I mean, any and everything was fair play for them out there. Children, animals, whatever they felt like getting with. I'm not going to say that exact person is over here in the United States, but the belief that allowed that kind of interaction to be a normal thing that no one else in their village would even care to speak about has almost successfully made its way into the United States because contracts have ended. I I heard a lot of people like on different, well, mainly YouTube, but YouTube itself plays different other platforms. YouTube will play a little bit of TikTok, a little bit of everything else. Other than just YouTube. And a lot of people still have similar complaints. Uh, Things being unjustified, people feeling like they've been wronged, and I'm like, the United States is not perfect. And even for the place that belonged to the ones wasn't even perfect itself. They brought perfection with them, but the places they were at were never perfect. People who feel wronged are people who feel like they're more at a disadvantage. Either team up with who they see as a winning team or team up to create the numbers to call themselves a winning team. I'm not encouraging no one from the US to do anything violent. This is why I say the most important thing we need to do is read. Because we gotta first realize that most of our leaders, they're like one person up against thousands, or trying to adhere to thousands and make what 1,000 people won't come true, and have been unsuccessful, and have instead just looked out for themselves and their own safety. I don't blame them too much. Too much. I don't blame them too much. I do blame them, but I don't blame them too much because most people, when they feel outnumbered, they're going to cave. But us in the United States have to learn to read English 1. Not English, English 1. Or what most people would probably call legalese, legal talk. So that way we can properly convey or make what we want completely understood and known without any other interpretations to be thrown into the mix and skewed and skewed and all kinds of stuff like that. Let that be, if anything, let that be the fight. Fight against the paperwork that has put everything into place to be taken advantage of. Now, just know there are always going to be somebody out there who's going to try to take advantage of something. But it needs to be we need a more solid foundation. Forgive those who have wronged you and ask for forgiveness of those you wronged. And push ahead for a better future. For everyone who is complaining about children coming up missing, if the ways of the Middle East comes completely into law and recognized, you can definitely expect to see that number double. You can guarantee that number is going to double, and perhaps even more. because over there, that's not really a thing. Trafficking is not really a thing. Molestation, pedophilia, is not a thing over there. There's a lot of things they do over there that it is what us, what we would kind of consider, what us in the United States consider unlawful. They don't even mention it or talk bad about it. I'm not trying to scare anybody because it took me a while, even with speaking with my own parents about this, or others other than my parents, for me to finally realize they did not want to hear that. Why would you want to hear something bad about someone who you consider your heroes? Egyptian. A lot of people want to be a King Tut, a Mansa Musa, a Gandhi. Their nationalities allow them to do things that we would disagree with. Some of us would disagree with. Because I'm not saying all of us disagree with it in the United States. There are those who still do those unlawful acts. And I'm certain that they will welcome their ways over here in hopes of kind of like mentally trying to spiritually cleanse themselves. And other than that, it's uh, pray to God, the one and only God, the only God. Like I said, I studied a lot of different religions, and from languages I couldn't read. Hopefully, I had a trustworthy enough interpreter, and from what they told me, all the books are a bit linear. You know, some of them taking what they like and some exiting what they don't like. But once you read it and put the timeline together, you're like, oh, okay, you know. The devil isn't really real. But God is. I know that's something, but for those who do wrong, when they are punished by God, or what some people like to call karma, or the universe, or something of that nature, whichever they like to call it, they do feel wrong. in a way. They feel like they've been wrong. Even though they done wrong, in their mind, they feel like they've been wrong. That's a egoic thing that they have a hard time getting over. People don't like to be told they're wrong. I can say that from experience because I got real petty when I was in kindergarten. Um, simple questions, simple questions that would normally get simple answers. I always had some kind of complicated answer because I was always deeply thinking about something. And one of the things that was kind of like a final straw for my teacher was questions about the polar bear. I know, right? Simple, simple questions in kindergarten. What color is this animal? What color is this animal? And then when she asked, what color is the polar bear? All the kids are white. And I said, fluorescent, fluorescent. Why would a kid in why would a kid in kindergarten say fluorescent? I'm gonna tell you why. Because when I was young, my mom was a young my mom was a young mother, and she kind of dropped out of college around the time that she was pregnant with me, but she kept her college books. And when I was young, my first few books that I started reading was the World Atlas, Dictionary, and her college study books. For words I didn't know, I would just, if there was a word I didn't know, if there was a place I didn't know, I'm using the dictionary, I'm using the atlas, and I'm using other books that she had to figure out what was going on, what I needed to know. And I learned the word fluorescent. So I said fluorescent. I mean, I was wrong on the word, but so the teacher said, you know, why can't you just say white? I was saying because whenever we looked at a movie, National Geographic movie, I don't think students do that anymore, but we used to watch National Geographic movies. And other than being a deep thinker, I was also a deep observer. So as I'm watching, like, they showing a video of the polar bear climbing on the frozen mountain tops and they got the sunshine in the background, I'm looking at the color of the fur change right along with it. So I was an artist. I love to draw, and in order for me to draw things as realistic as possible, I had to observe it in the most detailed form as I could. Freeze the image in my head if I needed to, and draw it out. And just noticing how the sun changed the bear from white to yellowish gold is it wasn't like much of a reflection type deal, you know, to me. But all right, so I said fluorescent, and teacher was just like, I'm calling your mom. You don't want to say you're disrupting the class. You're saying that polar bear is this color and polar bear is supposed to be white. You're completely disrupting the class. I'm getting tired of you drawing in the middle of my studies. And I kind of was drawing in the middle for studies because we'll get some paperwork. I'll finish up my work quick, and then I go back to drawing. and she found it extremely disruptive. And so I failed kindergarten, and then now I didn't know I failed kindergarten. So next year I'm coming back, and I'm talking about my friends. They're like, "Yeah, we're going to this class. This is, I'm going to this class, and this teacher I already met my teacher." I'm like, I haven't met my teacher, so I'm like, I'm gonna walk with my best friend to his class because we was in the same class last year. I figured it was gonna be the same way for next year. I didn't know how next grade thing turned out to be. I was never told who my teacher was gonna be. So I'm sitting in her class for like half a day, and then she realized, it's like, hold on a second, I'm supposed to be counting X amount of students. Where does this extra student come from? Told her my name, and she was like, "You're not supposed to be in my class. You're not on my roster." And I was like, "Okay, okay." Um, so I went back to my old teacher. She was like, "Oh, you're not in this class," pointing me out, and I left. And eventually, the special ed teacher came by and said, "You're supposed to be in my class." And I was like, "Okay, didn't know I didn't know anything about special ed. I just, okay, my teacher found me. I'm about to go to my class." So I'm going into this classroom, and they were truly some of the nicest group of people I've ever met. Completely understanding, and it was just I was chilling. I was vibing with them, for a good bit until same thing. I'm doing my classwork, finish, and go back to drawing, and the teacher was like, "You're finishing up too fast. Take your time and do the work." And I was like, "Okay." I'm like, maybe I got something wrong, but I wasn't. Straight A student, straight A's. And eventually, I got to the point of questioning everything around me. I was because other students, in school, making fun, look at him, Shannon's in special ed, he he retarded, he retarded, and I'm like, what does retarded mean? Let me look in a dictionary. I was like, oh, I'm in the wrong class. This must not be the right teacher I was supposed to go to. So I went and talked to the teacher. I'm like, hey, I think I'm in the wrong classroom because other students told me I'm supposed to be retarded, and I looked it up, and I'm not. And she was like, "How are you supposed to know?" Well, same argument. You're not a doctor, psychologist, or anything of that nature to be able to diagnose yourself and tell me what you are, who and what you are. And I was like, well, if it's anything like the other students who's supposed to be more advanced than I, if what they're saying is true, if I'm making straight A's in this classroom, I need to either be advanced to a standard classroom or an advanced classroom. She did not like that. She started talking to the principal. Hey, this kid's over here questioning why is he in this classroom. Talk to the principal. She told me that I wasn't verbal enough. I was constantly drawing in class, and at and in my last year of kindergarten, I was constantly giving the wrong answers, and I just didn't know what that meant. It just blew my mind because I'm looking like, is there a grade above A? I'm like, maybe I am slow because I'm like, there must be another grade above A for me to constantly get the wrong answers but get straight A's in class. And I thought S was that grade, Even though the letter, being, way behind in the back, I was thinking S probably stood for like super or supreme or something. I was lost. I was lost in the sauce. and so after she told me that, I became extremely angry. But the way I expressed my anger is that I really became quiet. I mean, for the rest of that school year, I didn't say a word. I I didn't speak to no one. I didn't talk to anyone. I was just in my head like, how is this happening? Why did this happen? I talked to my mom, hey, what's going on? Why am I in this classroom? I need to get out this classroom. She was saying the same thing the teachers was. So I stopped talking to her too. I stopped talking to everyone. I didn't talk to anybody in my family. I didn't talk to anybody in school. I didn't talk to anybody for nothing. I just stayed quiet in my head, thinking, studying, trying to figure out why, how, and whole thing was I just didn't know what indoctrination was. I was I I never converted easily. I always relied on my own intuition. And it wasn't always the correct thing to do because I'm not gonna say it wasn't always the correct thing to do. I didn't always use it correctly because the main thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to have friends. I wanted to have people that I can vibe with and chill with and talk like with everybody else with. But the way I thought and the way that I was, it it made it very difficult until I just kind of started acting up like the rest of the other kids. So being angry and silent, and I started gaining a bit of a reputation. And it was like, oh man, he's kind of cool for a slow kid. Look at the way he handles the teachers. He don't really talk to them. Teachers already know he ain't gonna say nothing to him. He ain't is kind of gained a bit of a slight cool status, but I didn't know what the cool status was. I didn't know what it was. I was just angry, and I secluded myself everywhere I was at. I secluded myself, and it was like there was only one person I could talk to, and that was God. And He was always, be patient, be patient. And whenever I started getting impatient, He would show me my future multiple times for me to be able to interact with it. And for most of those for most of those future sites that I interacted with in my mind and was seeing and saw, I failed in plenty and thousands of ways. I failed. Almost to the point where I felt like even up to this point that I shouldn't say anything. That if I do say something, it would cause another failure. don't like talking about future sight. Only thing I say is God is real. God is beyond real. To present time. Back to present time. For everybody out here complain about how they feel wrong by Trump, let me briefly say this. I never care that much about any celebrity or any name brand or anything of that nature. Whenever I see people who did care about those, to me, it seemed like people who were either lying to themselves or fake to themselves in a way. You know, there's some things you can agree with, but for you to like a celebrity or something so much that you want to look like them, be like them, dress like them, that meant to me that you were being untrue to yourself. Because there were things that you liked before you knew of those people and wanted to be like them. There were things that you liked and things that you wanted to do yourself. You had your own mind before you started adopting someone else's mindset. And that's what made me like people before they got off into the maturity of name brand clothing and looking a certain type of way, dressing a certain type of way. Their authenticity. I see people heading down a dangerous route. Muslim lifestyle, I guess from an outside perspective, may look cool in a way. I thought of it at some point in time. When I was young, I used to like the movie Aladdin. I wanted to wear those kind of pants. I wasn't a mom. I used to like wearing a vest. So that's kind of what all I thought of as the culture. You stay in the sand. You got these little cool baggy clothes, and you know, other than that, your life is like living on the beach. When I was young, that's how I thought of it. After living around them, watching their day-to-day lifestyle, seeing how they live, I was I was nearly disgusted, but I wasn't like how to put it. I was disgusted, but I wasn't disgusted at the people because I felt like if you only have so much material, you use what you can work with. But at a certain point, when you realize that it's not just people living a certain way due to lack of resources, but what their religion said what was supposed to be the correct way. I was I was just it blew my mind. And I could see why the young kids and teenagers always their first set of English words. What you got for me? What you got for me? I give the kids bottles of water and toilet paper. I didn't really have much, but I didn't want to see nobody just bend over and flick sand up there. I was like, that's extremely unhygienic. If what's all in this sand, you know, bones, flesh, feces, stuff like that, basically a giant kitty litter box, and you're just, you know, use the bathroom, pop a squat over a hole and flick some dirt up there. I don't think all kinds of medical issues started just pop up in my head. I'm like,